Jai Janendra, and welcome back to your course on Jain philosophy in daily life. In this set of lectures, we're going to talk about politics and social justice in Jainism and see how these things are interrelated and always been a part of Jain tradition, with a special emphasis on the way that it manifests in contemporary Jain life and action. The first thing I want to highlight here is the life of Acharya Tulsi and his Anuvrat movement, which was a global movement aimed at helping people adopt the lesser vows, the Anuvrats, into their daily life. The topics that we'll look at here are the Anuvrat movement in history to understand how and when it emerged, what it was sort of responding to, the vows of the Anuvrat movement, the science of living education that emerged out of this movement, and the sadhana that all Anuvratis can undertake in their own lives. First, let's start with the history. The Anuvrat movement was founded by Acharya Tulsi, the 9th Acharya of the Theravada sect of the Shvetambara Jains. In 1949, he launched the Anuvrat movement in Rajasthan after India had gained its independence 2 years earlier for two different reasons. And these are important historical reasons for understanding why, from a political perspective, this would emerge. Number one, in the wake of World War II, when the US had dropped nuclear bombs on Japan and the world was seemingly descending into such violence, Acharya Tulsi wanted to make the world a better place. And the Anuvrat movement, as we'll see what it asks of people, certainly would make the world a better place. Number two, in the wake of Indian independence, where greedy capitalism grew, he wanted, therefore, to make a better nation. So the Anuvrat movement was determined to help make a better nation for India as well in the wake of its own independence. The major goals, as you can see here, were environmental and social change. So the two things that I mentioned before have to deal more with social change, but as we'll see, environmental and social change within the Jain tradition are seen within this interconnected web of life. You can't separate human welfare and environmental welfare apart. They go hand in hand. This is an important insight, not only of the Jain tradition, but really of all Indic traditions. The emphasis was on the individual to change themselves to help the environment and society. So for example, by adopting veganism or adopting vegetarianism back then, you could help the environment and you could help society as a result, because then you wouldn't be releasing seemingly inordinate amounts of climate change gases. Another question I want us to keep in mind here is that we can't only focus on the individual. Is that always sufficient? And in neoliberal capitalism, it is also necessary to look at broader structures within society. But we need to look at both individual transformation and structural transformation. And what I like about Acharya Tulsi's thing, even though it was focused on the individual, it was meant to create structural change. It was intended to be secular so that anyone, anywhere, could take these vows to make the world a better place. What Tulsi did to create the Anuvrat movement, Anuvrat again means lesser vows, meaning they're lesser than the ones a full-on ascetic or monk or nun would take in the tradition, but they're similar. What he did was he mixed the 5 traditional Anuvrat vows, which were for lay householders in the Jain tradition, universalized them for everyone, and then it added 6 more to total 11. All of which were intended to purify the soul. So I'm going to show you all 11 of these right now so you can see what they are. Number 1, a vow not to kill, to commit suicide, or to have an abortion in the spirit of ahimsa. He's saying this from the perspective of reducing the violence that you inflict on the world. Do not kill, do not commit suicide, and also do not have an abortion. Number 2, he's not saying you can't have an abortion, but he's saying take a vow yourself not to, just to be. For people who are pro-choice, he was advising that you don't, strictly from a karmic perspective. Number 2, a vow not to attack or be aggressive and to support peace and disarmament. So you can see here the vow not to engage again in more warfare, which had just ended with World War II. So these are to protect life, right? These things of ahimsa. Number 3, a vow to only protest nonviolently and not to be destructive, such as in the case of people like Gandhi, who protested nonviolently, and it worked. India had achieved independence with it, Gandhi was inspired by the Jains, as we'll see later. And Acharya Tulsi knew that nonviolent protest does work. You don't need to be destructive, and you can still get what you want, which is justice in the name of peace, not in the name of war. Number 4, a vow not to discriminate by caste or color and to promote human unity. So this was intended to help overcome racism, classism, casteism, which were big issues not only in India, but all over the world. People are judged by the family that they're born into to be lesser than you, or by the color of their skin or the class that they're born into, which often overlaps. This was an idea that all humans are fundamentally human at the start. We all start equal as human beings, and all should be treated equally as human beings. This creates a sense of human unity. Number 5, a vow to practice religious tolerance and stay clear of sectarianism. This is, of course, another problem that causes extreme violence to people around us socially. And if we tolerate each other's religions, not just tolerate, but accept, as long as they don't involve violence, and we stay clear of sectarianism, then any disagreement we have can be put to the task of coming to a newer truth rather than to some form of violence. Number 6, a vow to be moral in business and social behavior with no deceit. That's a very challenging thing to do for people who own businesses, and something to think about. But not deceiving people in business and friendships and so forth is a vow worth taking. Number 7, the vow to practice chastity and to limit possessions. This involves a parigraha and brahmacharya. The practice of chastity for lay people would involve having one partner for life. So being content with the partner that you have and limiting the number of possessions that you have is something that is good for the planet and is good socially for people. It's good to keep families together and to keep things from falling apart. So Anuvrat really promoted this idea. Number 8, a vow to not practice unethically in politics. So in today's politically charged world, it's important to consider not only ahimsa, nonviolence, but also satya, truth. What is true? What is true, and why do you promote it? Is it in the spirit of nonviolence, or is it in the spirit of violence? And according to Acharya Tulsi, what we say should be true in politics, and what we do should be nonviolent. And how really relevant is that message for the political situation that we find ourselves in today? Number 9, a vow to not encourage evil cultural customs. So anything that happens within a cultural custom was somewhere created by culture, by humans, and we can overcome it if it causes any sort of violence. And really, this involves all of the anuvratas. And when I say anuvratas, I mean the 5 vows of nonviolence, not lying, not stealing, celibacy or chastity or sensual control, and non-possession, those 5 things. Number 10, a vow to live free from addiction. Again, this involves all the anuvratas in a sense. So don't allow yourself to become addicted to things. Addiction has a huge effect on people's minds and bodies. And oftentimes people go to addictions because they have some past trauma or pain. Instead, what if we lived in a world that supported people who have trauma and pain and could recover from that addiction through working with people who are compassionate and nonviolent? Number 11, a vow to prevent pollution, not cut trees, and not waste water. You can see number 11 is very important in terms of environmental problems, which were only just beginning in the mid-20th century. But as we can see, it's still an applicable principle, as are all of these in some way, shape, or form, even more relevant perhaps to our current situation, which Acharya Tulsi could see growing out of the capitalism that was already in the West and was starting to take over India during its post-independence phase. There are specific additional other vows that are given for specific occupations by the Anuvrat movement. So if you're curious about yours and what the challenges are in particular occupations, you can go to the Anuvrat movement online. You can Google it and you can find what these specific additional vows are and what the different occupations are that there are specific vows that you can take. Now, out of the Anuvrat movement grew the science of living. The Anuvrat movement is supplemented by this curriculum for school children to help with their emotional development. So it's a science of living, how to live. It's like a technology for living. We already talked about what science means in the Jain tradition, but it means like this is really going to work. There's a certain science behind it, right? It carries a certain amount of authority. So the science of living was founded in 1978. So this is later by Acharya Mahapragnya, who was the direct descendant then of Acharya Tulsi, who also created the system of Preksha Dhyan, meditation, which we've also seen. Preksha strengthens the practitioner's commitments to the Anuvratas by strengthening the body and mind through postural yoga and meditation and pranayama. And so Science of Living was this curriculum that also involved Preksha Dhyan, and Preksha Dhyan came from the same person, Acharya Mahapragnya, to give people the tools to strengthen their body and mind for the spiritual path. Finally, there is a certain sadhana for anuvratis. Anuvratis are those who have taken on the vows, the anuvrats. So if you take on these 5 vows of ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, and aparigraha, then you, my friend, are an anuvrati. The sadhana, or the spiritual practice for anuvratis, are 5 things you can do every day in order to really live according to the anuvrat way of life. So I gave you all those other things before, but if you want to keep these things in mind along with those, this is the way, a simple way that everyone can live this. Number 1, practice Preksha Dhyana every single day, at least for a little bit of time. So this is a form of insight meditation. There's even an app for it, and there's a website for it. There's YouTube videos for it. So if you can't get to a Preksha Dhyan center where you live, then you can go online and find the trainings, or on your mobile device and find the trainings, and you'll be able to do them there. Number 2, retain a conciliatory attitude to keep peace in domestic life. So really try to get along with others. Don't try to be aggressive or oppositional with others. Try to communicate non-violently. Try to keep a good household. Don't drink alcohol. Don't abuse drugs. Don't do these kinds of things that will cause you to have a disruptive, unpeaceful domestic life. And don't we all want a peaceful domestic life? Number 3, limit possessions and consumption. Of course, from an environmental perspective and a spiritual perspective, this is very important. Don't over accumulate things you don't need, because that hurts not only you spiritually and maybe also your health, but it also affects the environment and animals and other people around you. Number 4, control your eating. So eating is a big way within the Jain tradition that we gain self-control and spiritual self-control and self-restraint through fasting, giving up certain foods, going vegan, as we've mentioned. And number 5, be diligent, self-reliant, and simple. So follow the path, stay strong in yourself, and live a simple life. The simple life is really the happy life. So this is the Anuvrat movement started by Acharya Tulsi. It has 11 principles and 5 things you can do every day right here, right now. If you're interested in learning more about the Anuvrat movement, and particularly about Preksha Dhyan and the Anuvrat sadhana, I highly recommend that you check out the website for Preksha Dhyan and get the app to follow its meditations.